Hey guys, tonight we wake before the sun rises over the slow, dark ribbon of the Nile, and you stretch your arms in the cool blue hush of early morning, already knowing that the day ahead will smell faintly of salt, resin, and river mud. A thin mist clings to the water, drifting like a lazy spirit between the reeds. Somewhere in the distance, a boatman clears his throat, and the sound skips across the surface like a tossed pebble. You sit up on your woven mat, joints popping in a way that reminds you that ancient careers do not come with ergonomic seating. You probably won't survive this, at least not socially, if you tell people at a dinner party that you spend your days preparing the dead. But here, in the rhythm of the old kingdom's hum, it is not morbid, it is sacred, it is practical. It is employment with surprisingly good job security.
So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, tell me your location and the local time where you are. I like imagining this little circle of sleepy historians scattered across the globe, all drifting off together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand, rinse your face in a shallow clay basin, and step into the pale sand outside your home. The eastern horizon glows faintly pink. The Nile breathes out a cool breeze, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant papyrus. This river is everything: transportation, irrigation, calendar, and, in a way, co-worker. Without the Nile's predictable flooding, there would be no grain surplus, no monumental building projects, and certainly no honorary industry for you to clock into. You make your way toward the embalming house, known as the Per Nefer, the House of Beauty. It sits slightly apart from the bustle of the village, close enough to the river for convenience, far enough for comfort. Beauty, in this case, does not mean cosmetics. It means spiritual perfection. You're not running a spa, though admittedly there are more oils involved than one might expect. As you walk, you pass laborers heading toward construction sites. Perhaps they're hauling limestone blocks destined for a royal tomb. The era you live in reveres the afterlife with a kind of administrative enthusiasm. Mainstream historians agree that mummification became widespread during the Old Kingdom, evolving from earlier, simpler burials in desert sand that naturally preserved bodies. You sometimes imagine those early accidental mummies, dried by the hot sand, as the original prototypes, nature's first drafts. Inside the embalming house, the air is cooler, shaded by mud brick walls. The scent of natron, an ancient salt mixture harvested from dry lake beds, lingers like a sharp whisper. Natron is your most reliable ally. Chemically speaking, it's a blend of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, and it works wonders at drawing moisture from a body. You don't call it chemistry, of course. You call it tradition, but the results speak for themselves. Your fellow technicians arrive one by one. There's Menka, who always hums off-key hymns to Osiris. There's Tia, who swears that a precise wrapping fold can determine your reputation for decades. She's not entirely wrong. In this line of work, sloppy linen is basically career sabotage. You pause before entering the main chamber and wash your hands in Nile water. Purification matters. The priests will handle the sacred words, but you are still part of a holy process. The ancient Egyptians believed the body must remain intact for the Ka and Ba, the spiritual components of a person, to recognize it in the afterlife. Without preservation, the journey beyond would be complicated, and no one wants their eternity complicated. Historians still argue whether the earliest embalmers fully understood the biological mechanics of decay, or simply refined their methods through careful observation. You suspect it's a bit of both. When something smells terrible after 3 days in the sun, even the most mystical mind starts experimenting. A covered bier rests at the center of the room. Today's client, if you're feeling irreverent, is a middle-ranking official, not royalty, but wealthy enough to afford the full 70-day treatment. Yes, 70 days. That's the traditional duration described by Herodotus centuries later, though scholars debate how strictly that timeline was followed in earlier periods. Either way, you are in for the long haul.
You help arrange the tools on a low wooden table. Bronze hooks, obsidian blades, linen strips folded with military precision. There's a jar of palm wine for cleansing. There are sacks of natron waiting patiently. The light filters in through a narrow slit in the wall, catching dust motes that drift lazily, like they have nowhere better to be. You take a slow breath. This is not a rushed craft. It cannot be. Precision is kindness here. There's a quirky rumor that embalmers sometimes wore jackal masks during certain rituals, honoring Anubis, the jackal-headed god associated with mummification. Whether that happened daily or only in ceremonial reenactments is debated, but you have to admit, it would make for a memorable workplace uniform. Imagine clocking in and putting on a jackal snout before your morning shift. OSHA would have questions. Outside, the sun finally crests the horizon, casting gold into the room. The day begins in earnest. You step closer to the beer, aware that your hands will guide someone toward eternity. It's a strange responsibility for someone who still occasionally forgets where they left their sandals. And as the first true warmth of morning settles over the Nile, you steady yourself, ready to begin the sacred sequence that will carry you through salt, linen, resin, prayer, and patience, one careful motion at a time. The golden light strengthens, sliding slowly across the mud brick floor until it reaches the beer at the center of the room. You and the others gather in a loose semicircle, your sandals whispering against packed earth. The air feels still, respectful. Before any careful work begins, there is purification. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just deliberate. You lift a small jar of water drawn from the Nile at dawn. The river is not merely convenient plumbing, it is sacred, a gift believed to be tied to the tears of Isis and the lifeblood of the land itself. Mainstream historians note that purification with Nile water was a standard early step in the mummification process, cleansing both physically and ritually before more invasive procedures began. You dip a linen cloth into the cool water and gently wipe the skin, slow strokes from head to toe. The cloth glides over stillness. There is no rush. If you hurry, you dishonor both craft and client. Palm wine comes next. You pour a little into a shallow bowl. Its scent is sharp and faintly sweet, surprisingly pleasant considering you are technically disinfecting a body. Palm wine, with its mild alcohol content, likely served a practical purpose as well as a symbolic one. Historians still argue whether ancient embalmers fully grasped its antibacterial properties, or simply observed that it helped prevent unpleasant changes. Either way, you swab carefully, your hands steady, your breathing calm. Manka murmurs a quiet invocation to Osiris, lord of the underworld. The priests will handle the longer chants later, but even here, in this preparatory stage, words matter. Sound itself feels like a tool. You notice how your own breathing begins to match the cadence of his low voice, a soft hum beneath the morning light. You help adjust the body on the bier, aligning the limbs. Respectful symmetry is important. Ancient Egyptian belief holds that the body must be whole for the Ka, the life force, to return and recognize its earthly form. Without a preserved vessel, the journey through the afterlife becomes uncertain, and uncertainty is the last thing anyone wants when eternity is involved. There is a curious fringe tidbit whispered among some workers that certain embalmers would quietly place tiny charms beneath the tongue, even before the official amulet stage, just in case wandering spirits were feeling impatient. Whether that was common practice or just professional superstition is unclear. You've never seen your supervisor do it, but you can't deny the comfort of a little extra insurance policy. Ancient problems, ancient solutions.
You rinse your hands again, The Nile water feels colder now against your skin, or perhaps you are simply more aware of it. Outside, you hear the distant bray of a donkey and the rhythmic slap of wet laundry against stone by the riverbank. Life continues, loud and bright, just beyond these walls devoted to stillness.
The body must also be ritually purified with incense smoke. Tia brings a small brazier forward. Resin crackles softly as it warms, releasing a fragrant cloud that drifts upward and curls along the ceiling beams. Frankincense and myrrh, resins traded across long desert routes, are not merely luxuries. They carry connotations of divinity and transformation. The scent is warm, almost citrusy, wrapping around you like a memory. You wave the smoke gently, allowing it to bathe the still form. There is something quietly intimate about this stage. You are not yet performing the more technically demanding tasks. You are preparing a threshold. In a way, you are the caretaker of a doorway.
Scholars still debate the exact social standing of embalmers. Some evidence suggests they were respected specialists, tied closely to temple institutions. Other interpretations hint that despite the sacred nature of their work, they might have occupied an ambiguous social position because of their daily contact with death. You glance at your own hands and think, well, ambiguous is better than unemployed.
The purification continues with careful attention to the mouth and eyes. You gently close the lids, pressing them down with quiet precision. Later, amulets may be placed to protect these features, but for now, your focus is on composure. The face must look peaceful, eternal rest, not eternal surprise. You notice the quality of the linen cloths laid nearby. Linen, woven from flax grown along the Nile, is more than fabric, it is status. Wealthier families provide finer weaves, sometimes even repurposed household linens. There is something oddly poetic about being wrapped in the same material that once caught sunlight in a living room. Sustainability, ancient edition.
Menka finishes his murmured hymn, and silence settles again. The incense thins into faint ribbons. You and your colleagues exchange brief nods. The cleansing is complete. The body has been washed with sacred water, treated with palm wine, and enveloped in fragrant smoke. It is ready for the next, more intricate stage. You step back for a moment, rolling your shoulders gently. Outside, the sun climbs higher, warming the mud brick walls. A bead of sweat gathers at your temple, and you wipe it away with the back of your hand. Ancient Egypt is generous with sunlight. Air conditioning will not be invented for several thousand years, and you can't help but think that if the gods truly wanted to impress you, a small breeze inside the embalming house would be appreciated.
Still, there is a rhythm to this work. Wash, purify, align, prepare. Each action feels like part of a long practiced dance passed down through generations. You are not improvising. You are continuing a tradition that has grown more refined with each dynasty. And as you stand beside the bier, the scent of resin lingering softly in the air, you understand that purification is not just for the body. It steadies you too. It reminds you that what comes next, delicate, precise, debated even by future historians, must be approached with calm hands and a clear mind. The room is ready. So are you. You step forward again as the room grows quieter. The earlier scent of incense now softened into something faint and sweet. The purification is complete. What comes next requires steadier hands, calmer breath, and a willingness to focus on detail without letting your imagination wander too far ahead. This is the delicate work within. You reach for the obsidian blade. Its edge is dark, almost glassy, sharper than most bronze tools available to you. Mainstream historians note that embalmers often used stone blades for the initial incision because obsidian can produce a remarkably fine cut. It is strange to think that in an age of towering stone monuments, one of the most precise tools in the room
looks like a shard of night. You position yourself carefully along the left side of the body. Tradition favors this placement. The incision is small and controlled, just enough to allow access. You move with care, guided by experience, and by the quiet presence of your colleagues. There is no rush, no unnecessary movement. The work is methodical, almost meditative. You remove the internal organs one by one, each handled with attention. The liver, the lungs, the stomach, and the intestines are treated separately. In later dynasties, these will be placed in canopic jars, each protected by one of the four sons of Horus, Imseti, Hapi, Duamutef, and Kebesenuef, though practices evolve over centuries. In your time, the jars are already an important feature for wealthier burials. The lids, often carved with human or animal heads, seem to watch you with silent approval. The heart, however, you leave in place. That is essential. The heart is considered the seat of intelligence and emotion, the very core of a person's being. It will be weighed in the afterlife against the feather of Mot, symbol of truth and balance. Without it, judgment would be awkward. Imagine showing up to eternity, missing your most important paperwork. There is an oddly practical rhythm to this process. You pass each organ to Tia, who gently rinses and prepares them for drying. They will be treated with natron, just like the body itself. Nothing is left to chance. And then, there is the brain. You pick up a slender bronze hook, long and slightly curved. Through the nasal passage, you carefully begin the process of breaking down and extracting the brain matter. It is not glamorous work, but it is effective. Mainstream accounts from later Greek observers describe this technique in detail, and archaeological evidence supports that the brain was often removed this way. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians believed the brain had any real function at all, since it was usually discarded while the heart was preserved. Some scholars suggest they may have seen it as unimportant tissue. Others think practical preservation concerns drove the decision. From your perspective, it is simply procedure. You focus on precision, not philosophy. There is a quiet joke among embalmers that if the brain truly held wisdom, perhaps removing it explains some of the questionable decisions made by officials in life. You allow yourself the faintest smile. 3,000 years from now, someone will probably make the same joke about you. Humanity is consistent that way. Once the organs are removed and set aside, you rinse the internal cavity with palm wine and aromatic spices. The scent rises again, mingling with the lingering incense. You then pack the cavity temporarily with linen and natron to begin the drying process. Every step is deliberate, layered with both practicality and belief. There's a lesser-known, somewhat fringe idea circulating among certain temple circles that specific prayers whispered during this stage can influence how smoothly the ka reunites with the body. Some embalmers lean close and murmur quiet reassurances, almost like speaking to someone asleep. Whether this is officially sanctioned or simply personal comfort is unclear, but you find yourself occasionally doing it anyway. It feels kind. Outside, the sun has climbed higher, and heat presses gently against the walls. Sweat beads at your brow again. You pause briefly to stretch your fingers. Fine motor skills are not to be underestimated in a world without magnifying lenses or surgical gloves. You are relying entirely on sight, touch, and inherited knowledge. You step back to assess your work. The cavity is cleansed. The organs are separated for preservation. The heart remains undisturbed, resting quietly where it belongs. The form still resembles the person who once walked along the Nile's banks, who once spoke and laughed, and perhaps complained about taxes. There is a solemnity here, but not dread. Death, in your culture, is not an abrupt end. It is a transition, carefully managed. You are less a technician of endings and more a facilitator of continuity. Menka adjusts the placement of the canopic jars nearby, ensuring they are ready for the next phase. The carved faces catch the light, casting small shadows that stretch across the table. You imagine future archaeologists debating your exact methods, arguing in quiet conference rooms about incision angles and resin composition. If only they knew you were mostly trying not to smudge anything.
With the internal work complete for now, you gently close the incision area, preparing it for packing and eventual sealing. The body will soon enter its long rest beneath layers of natron, beginning the transformation from mortal remains to something enduring. You take one final steadying breath. The most intricate part of today's labor is behind you. The room feels warmer, quieter, as if even the dust motes are settling in approval. And as you wash your hands once more in cool Nile water, you sense that the day is shifting into its next slow chapter, one defined not by delicate cuts, but by patience, salt, and the quiet passage of time.
The room settles into a quieter rhythm now, as if even the walls understand that the next stage requires patience more than precision. You and the others move with unhurried coordination, bringing forward the heavy sacks of natron. When you untie one, the salt mixture inside looks pale and grainy, almost like coarse desert sand, harmless at first glance, but powerful in its purpose.
Mainstream historians describe natron as a naturally occurring blend of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, and small amounts of salt and sodium sulfate, harvested from dry lake beds such as Wadi Natrun. In your world, you don't recite chemical compositions. You simply know that without this substance, none of this would work. Natron is the quiet hero of the embalming house. You begin by gently filling the body cavity with small linen packets of natron, placing them carefully where moisture once lingered. There is no force in your movements, only method. Each handful makes a soft whispering sound as it pours, like dry wind brushing across dunes. Then you and Menka lift more natron and cover the body completely, forming a low, pale mound atop the bier. It feels almost ceremonial, like tucking someone into a very serious, very long nap, if blankets were made of salt and lasted 40 days. 40 days, that is the traditional drying period, often cited by historians, forming part of the broader 70-day mummification timeline. Historians still argue whether every embalming adhered strictly to this schedule, or whether the timeframe varied based on climate, status, or available resources. You suspect reality is more flexible than the ideal. Even sacred industries have supply chain issues.
The natron will draw out moisture slowly, steadily, transforming the body from vulnerable to enduring. You know from experience that patience here determines everything later. Too little drying, and decay continues. Too much handling, and you risk damage. Balance is key. Very Ma'at of you, really. You step back and wipe your hands on a spare linen cloth. The salt has already left your skin slightly dry. There's a faint tightness in your fingertips, a reminder that natron does not discriminate between living and dead. You flex your hands gently. Occupational hazard number 17.
The organs removed earlier are placed in their own containers of natron. Tia arranges them carefully in shallow trays. She always insists on labeling them with small tags of linen marked in ink. It's not glamorous, but it prevents confusion later. No one wants to play a guessing game with internal anatomy. Outside, the midday sun presses heavily against the roof. The embalming house grows warm, despite its thick walls. You open a small vent near the ceiling, letting a slow drift of air circulate through the chamber. Dust motes dance lazily in the beam of light that spills through.
This waiting period will not pass in a single sitting. You will return day after day to check the progress, adjusting the natron, ensuring even coverage. It becomes part of your routine, as steady as the Nile's rise and fall. In fact, your entire profession depends on cycles, flood and harvest, life and death, drying and wrapping.
There is a lesser-known story, whispered among some workers, that during the drying days, embalmers occasionally leave small offerings of bread near the bier, not for the body, but for wandering spirits who might be curious. Officially, this is unnecessary. Unofficially, it never hurts to be polite to the unseen. You've seen Menka do it once, pretending he dropped his lunch. You chose not to comment. As the natron mound settles into place, you smooth its surface carefully, almost like sculpting. There's something oddly peaceful about this stage. The most intricate tasks are paused. Now, time itself becomes your partner.
You sit on a low stool for a moment, allowing your breathing to slow. The scent of salt fills the air, clean and dry. It is less dramatic than incense, less sharp than palm wine. It smells like preservation.
Your mind drifts briefly to the desert beyond the Nile Valley. Before formal mummification techniques developed, many early Egyptians were buried directly in shallow sand graves. The dry heat naturally desiccated the bodies, preserving them by accident. Some scholars suggest that observing these naturally preserved remains inspired the more elaborate artificial methods you practice now. Historians still argue whether the transition from natural to artificial mummification was gradual experimentation or a sudden ritual innovation. You imagine it was someone noticing, quite practically, that sand did a good job, and then thinking, what if we improve on that?
You rise again and check the coverage one last time. Every contour is hidden beneath pale granules. The body beneath is beginning its quiet transformation. Days will pass. You will return each morning, brushing away spent natron, replacing it as needed. You will notice subtle changes, the skin tightening, the form becoming lighter as moisture disappears. It is not a dramatic metamorphosis. It is subtle, incremental, almost meditative. In these waiting days, you attend to other clients, other tasks. You prepare linen strips, grind resins, repair tools. The embalming house never truly rests. Death, after all, does not consult the calendar. And yet, when you step inside each morning and see that pale mound resting undisturbed, there is a quiet satisfaction. The process is working, slowly, reliably. You brush a stray grain of natron from the edge of the bier and glance toward the doorway, where the bright afternoon sun frames the world of the living in gold. Life hums outside, children laughing, merchants bargaining, fishermen casting nets. Inside, beneath salt and silence, time moves differently. You place the final sack of natron against the wall and wash your hands once more in Nile water, cool and grounding. The day's labor shifts from action to endurance, from movement to watchfulness. And as the sun begins its gradual descent, you understand that preservation is not only about skill, it is about patience, the willingness to let days stretch long and quiet, while salt and time do their gentle, invisible work. When the long drying days finally ease toward completion, the embalming house stirs with a subtle shift in energy. You can feel it as soon as you step inside. The work is about to become intricate again. Less waiting, more hands-on care. The natron has done its quiet miracle, and now it's time to coax the body back towards something recognizably human. You brush away the last of the salt with careful strokes, sweeping grains into shallow trays. The body beneath is lighter now, firmer, the skin drawn tight, like parchment left too long in the sun. This is expected. This is good. Mainstream historians agree that proper dehydration was the most critical factor in successful mummification. Everything that follows is refinement. You reach for small bowls of resin warmed gently near a brazier. As the mixture heats, it releases a rich, sticky aroma, sweet, smoky, and faintly medicinal. Pine resin, pistachia, and other plant-based substances are blended here, sometimes mixed with oils or beeswax. You don't have a written recipe. None of you do. These mixtures are learned by watching, by smell, by feel. The right consistency matters. Too thin, and it won't seal. Too thick, and it's a mess you'll be scraping off your fingers for days. You dip your fingers in and begin anointing the skin. The resin glides on slowly, restoring some suppleness and darkening the surface to a warm, honeyed tone. It helps seal out moisture and bacteria, acting as a protective barrier. From a modern perspective, it's surprisingly effective preservation technology. From your perspective, it's just another careful step done thousands of times before. As you work, Tia prepares the amulets. Small charms carved from faience, stone, or precious metals are laid out on a linen cloth. Each one has a purpose: the scarab for rebirth, the jed pillar for stability, the eye for protection. These are not decorations. They are insurance policies for the afterlife.
There's a quirky belief floating around the embalming house that the exact placement of an amulet can subtly influence a person's fortunes beyond death. Put the wrong charm slightly off-center, and who knows, maybe your client spends eternity mildly annoyed. Officially, placement follows tradition. Unofficially, everyone has opinions.
You help position the amulets against the body, nestling them gently between layers of linen padding. The heart scarab, in particular, is important. It's meant to keep the heart from testifying against its owner during judgment. Essentially, it's an ancient version of asking your own conscience to please keep quiet. Bold strategy.
Historians still argue whether these amulets were believed to have literal magical power, or whether they served more as symbolic comfort for the living. You suspect it doesn't really matter. Belief itself has weight, and if someone paid for a gold charm, you're not about to question its metaphysical efficacy.
Next come the stuffing materials. Linen, sawdust, sometimes even mud or resin-soaked cloth is used to fill out the body, restoring a lifelike shape. Without this step, the dried form would look too sunken, too skeletal. The goal is not just preservation, but recognition. The Ka must know where to return.
You pause occasionally to step back and assess the shape. Too much padding and the body looks oddly inflated. Too little, and it looks, well, like a raisin with ambitions. There is a sweet spot. Finding it takes practice. Menka jokes quietly that this part of the job is basically ancient tailoring. He's not wrong. You're sculpting with fabric and patience, aiming for an eternal fit. Somewhere in the future, a fashion historian might be impressed. Once the body is properly filled and anointed, you prepare the final resins. These are thicker, darker, used to coat the linen layers during wrapping. They smell intense now, filling the room with warmth and stickiness. Your hands will smell like this for days. No amount of Nile water fully removes it. You've accepted that this is just your scent now. Outside, the afternoon light slants through the doorway, casting long shadows across the floor. Dust floats lazily in the air. The world beyond continues its daily rhythm, unaware that here, you are carefully assembling someone's eternity. There is an ongoing scholarly debate about how standardized these resin mixtures really were. Some mummies show traces of exotic ingredients, suggesting long-distance trade and experimentation. Others appear more locally sourced. Historians still argue whether variations reflect regional traditions, economic status, or evolving religious beliefs. From where you stand, it mostly reflects what's available and who's paying.
As you finish preparing the charms and resins, you line everything up neatly. Order matters. Ritual thrives on structure. The body now rests prepared, infused with scent and symbolism, ready for the most visually iconic stage of all. You stretch your back gently, rolling your shoulders. This work requires endurance more than strength. Your fingers ache slightly from hours of fine movement. You shake them out and take a slow breath, letting the resin-scented air fill your lungs.
Soon, the linen will come out in full force. Strip after strip, layer upon layer. But for now, you pause, appreciating this moment, the quiet between stages, when the body is neither drying nor wrapped, but poised. You glance once more at the amulets, each one catching the light in its own small way. Tiny objects carrying enormous expectations. You hope they do their job. And as the sun edges lower in the sky, bathing the embalming house in amber light, you feel that familiar mix of focus and calm settle over you.
The hardest waiting is done. The careful artistry is about to begin. The linen waits in orderly stacks along the wall, folded with a precision that would make Tia nod in quiet approval. You step toward it with a steady breath, flexing your fingers one more time. This is the stage everyone imagines when they think of your profession. The endless wrapping, the gradual transformation from human outline to sculpted form. You begin with narrow strips, starting at the fingers and toes. Each digit is wrapped individually, spiraled with careful tension so the linen lies smooth but not tight. Mainstream historians confirm that mummies were often wrapped in multiple layers, sometimes hundreds of meters of linen for wealthier individuals. It is less like bandaging and more like weaving a cocoon. The linen smells faintly of sun and flax, a dry, comforting scent. You smooth each strip as you go, pressing it gently into place. Resin from earlier layers acts as adhesive, and you brush on more as needed, warming it slightly so it seeps into the fabric. The result is firm, protective, and surprisingly durable. You move methodically upward, hands, arms, legs, layer building upon layer. The room is quiet, except for the soft rustle of cloth and the occasional low murmur of a prayer. Wrapping is not hurried. It is repetitive in a soothing way, like the steady rhythm of weaving or braiding hair. At certain intervals, you pause to place additional amulets between the layers, a jed pillar at the spine, a tie-it knot near the chest. Each charm disappears beneath linen, hidden but present. There is something oddly reassuring about that. Protection you cannot see, but trust is there, rather like locking your door at night.
Fragments of daily life wrapped into eternity. Some scholars suggest this was practical thrift. Others think it symbolically bound the deceased to their lived world. Historians still argue whether the choice of linen carried personal meaning or was simply a matter of supply. You suspect it's a little of both. Ancient sustainability with spiritual flair.
As you reach the torso, the wrapping grows more complex. Wider sheets are layered across the chest and abdomen, smoothing the shape you carefully restored in the previous stage. You tuck and fold with deliberate care, ensuring the contours remain recognizable. Too bulky, and the form loses elegance. Too thin, and the structure lacks protection. It's a balancing act worthy of Ma'at herself. Menka hands you a broader strip for the shoulders. You angle it just so, crossing diagonally to reinforce stability. There's a quiet pride in achieving symmetry. You glance briefly at Tia, who gives the faintest approving nod. High praise indeed. Occasionally, you brush more resin across a completed section, sealing it before continuing. The sticky warmth seeps into the linen, darkening it slightly. The scent intensifies, earthy, pine-like, faintly sweet. You are certain that if anyone ever bottled this fragrance in the future, it would be called something dramatic, like Eternal Night. You would not buy it. You already smell like it permanently. The head requires special attention. You wrap the chin carefully to support it, then layer strips across the cheeks and brow. Some periods in Egyptian history favored the addition of painted cartonnage masks over the face, crafted from linen and plaster. But for now, your focus is on precision wrapping. The features remain subtly visible beneath the layers, like a sculpture emerging from cloth. There's a soft joke among embalmers that wrapping a face evenly is harder than convincing a scribe to work overtime. You don't laugh out loud, professionalism, but you think it. Mainstream archaeological finds show that wrapping patterns could vary, sometimes forming intricate crisscross designs. Whether these patterns held specific symbolic meaning or were primarily structural remains debated. Historians still argue whether certain wrapping styles signified regional workshops or particular dynasties. If that's true, somewhere far in the future, someone might identify your handiwork by the angle of your folds. You suddenly feel oddly self-conscious. As the final outer layers go on, you switch to broader sheets that encase the entire form. The body becomes smooth and unified, the silhouette unmistakably human,
yet transformed. You bind the layers gently with long horizontal bands, securing everything in place. You step back and examine the result. The once exposed form is now a pale, layered figure, sealed in linen and resin. It is not frightening. It is composed, calm, almost regal. The room feels warmer now from the steady work, and a sheen of perspiration rests along your temples. You wipe it away with your forearm, careful not to smudge the fresh resin. Outside, the afternoon light has shifted toward amber again, stretching shadows across the threshold. You circle the bier once more, checking for loose edges or uneven tension. You smooth a final strip near the ankle, pressing it firmly into place. Satisfied, you nod softly. Wrapping is complete. What remains now is not technical skill, but ceremony. Words, gestures, symbolic acts that will mark the transition from preserved body to prepared spirit.
You rest your hands lightly on the wrapped form for a moment, not out of superstition, but acknowledgement. Hours of careful labor lie beneath these layers. Patience, craft, inherited knowledge. And as the last threads settle and the scent of resin lingers thick in the air, you sense the day leaning gently towards its final, sacred acts.
The wrapping complete, the linen smooth and firm beneath your fingertips, the atmosphere in the embalming house shifts once more. Skill gives way to ceremony. Craft gives way to sacred performance. You step back as the priests enter, their white linen garments bright in the late afternoon glow. The air feels charged, not dramatic, but purposeful, like the pause before a deep breath.
The mummy now rests upright against a wooden support, prepared for what is known as the opening of the mouth ritual. Mainstream historians recognize this ceremony as one of the most important components of ancient Egyptian funerary practice, attested in tomb reliefs and texts across centuries. Its purpose is symbolic but profound, to restore the deceased's senses so they may eat, speak, breathe, and see in the afterlife.
You stand slightly behind the priests, hands folded loosely before you. Your role now is supportive, observant. You've done the physical work. Now the spiritual mechanics unfold.
One priest wears a stylized jackal mask, invoking Anubis, guardian of embalming. Whether every workshop performed the ritual with full regalia or reserved such costumes for elite burials is debated. Historians still argue whether these masks were commonly worn or primarily symbolic in artistic depictions. From where you stand, the jackal snout looks slightly cumbersome, but undeniably impressive. Workplace uniforms have certainly evolved over millennia.
The ritual tools are laid out carefully. A small adze-shaped instrument, incense burners, libation vessels. The adze, shaped somewhat like a carpenter's tool, is central to the rite. It is touched gently to the wrapped mouth, eyes, and ears. Not to cut, not to pry, simply to symbolically open them.
You watch as the priest raises the adze and lightly taps it against the area where the lips rest beneath linen. He chants softly, words flowing in an ancient cadence that vibrates through the quiet room. The sound feels older than the walls themselves. The incense is lit again. Frankincense smoke curls upward, fragrant and steady. The scent mingles with the resin still clinging to the wrappings. You inhale slowly. It smells like continuity.
There's something deeply human about this ritual. It acknowledges that life is sensory, that to exist fully is to taste bread, to feel wind, to hear laughter. The ceremony attempts to grant those capacities beyond death. In your culture, eternity is not an abstract cloud. It is fields, rivers, feasts, a continuation of the familiar, ideally with fewer taxes. A libation of milk and beer is poured gently near the feet of the mummy. The liquid darkens the earth floor briefly before soaking in. Offerings of food are placed nearby. Bread, onions, perhaps dried fish. You suppress a small smile at the thought that even in the afterlife, onions remain unavoidable.
Scholars still debate how literally ancient Egyptians interpreted this ritual. Did they believe the tools physically activated something mystical? Or was the rite more of a symbolic reassurance for the living family members? The answer may lie somewhere between faith and comfort. You know that when grieving relatives watch this ceremony, they seem calmer afterward. Sometimes that is enough. The priest touches the as lightly to the eyes, then the ears. He recites invocations that speak of restored sight and renewed hearing. You imagine the Ka hovering nearby, attentive. Menka stands beside you, unusually quiet. Even he refrains from humming today. There's a gravity here, but not heaviness. It feels structured, contained, like a story reaching its final chapter.
You notice small details, the flicker of flame reflected faintly on the linen, the slow drift of incense ash, the faint creak of wooden supports beneath the mummy's weight. The sun outside lowers further, casting amber light across the threshold. One fringe idea, occasionally whispered among temple scribes, suggests that the opening of the mouth ritual may have evolved from ceremonies originally performed on statues, literally animating carved figures so they could house divine presence. If so, then this ritual links humans and gods through shared symbolism. Whether that theory holds scholarly weight or not, you can't help appreciating the poetry of it. The chanting softens towards its conclusion. The priest lowers the adze and removes the jackal mask. The air feels still, expectant. And then there is silence. The ritual is complete. The senses are restored, at least symbolically. The mummy now stands not just preserved, but spiritually equipped. You step forward again to help secure the final outer shroud, a smooth white sheet that drapes over the wrapped form like a final layer of dignity. You smooth it gently, pressing out small folds. The texture beneath your palm is firm and cool. Outside, evening approaches. The Nile will soon reflect the colors of sunset, gold melting into rose, then violet. Inside, the embalming house feels hushed and satisfied. You glance at the finished form, remembering the first morning when the body lay newly arrived, washed with Nile water. Now it stands prepared for tomb and eternity. The transformation has been slow, careful, layered with salt, resin, linen, and words. And as the last traces of incense fade into the warm evening air, you sense that only one final task remains, carrying this quiet achievement from the house of beauty into the waiting embrace of stone and sand. Evening settles fully by the time the procession begins. The embalming house doors are opened wide, and the air outside feels cooler now, the heat of the day slipping quietly into the desert. The sky over the Nile burns in layered colors, amber fading into violet, violet dissolving into deep indigo. Torches are lit one by one, their flames wavering in the gathering dusk. You step forward with the others as the mummy, now enclosed within its inner coffin, is lifted carefully onto a wooden sledge. The wood creaks softly under the weight. Thick ropes are secured along the sides. The movement is deliberate, steady. There is no rushing this moment. Family members gather nearby, dressed in linen of varying quality, some crisp and finely woven, others simpler, slightly frayed at the edges. Grief in ancient Egypt is not quiet or hidden. Two women begin to wail, their voices rising and falling in practiced lamentation. Professional mourners are sometimes hired for larger funerals, though whether this particular family has done so is unclear. Some historians argue that ritualized weeping helped structure communal grief, giving it rhythm and containment. Listening to the cries now, you can believe it.
At the head of the procession walks a priest holding incense, the smoke trailing behind him like a thin gray ribbon. Another carries a small statue representing the deceased's ka. Offerings are borne in baskets: bread, beer, dried meats, figs. Practical items too: sandals, tools, cosmetic jars. Eternity, after all, requires supplies. The sledge begins to move. You take your place along the side, one hand steadying the wooden frame as it slides over the packed earth. Sand crunches beneath sandals. The Nile lies to your left, dark now except for ripples reflecting torchlight. Somewhere in the reeds, a nightbird calls.
The tomb waits beyond the cultivated land, where green fields give way to desert. The boundary feels symbolic, almost theatrical. Life and growth behind you, silence and permanence ahead. Yet you know the desert is not emptiness. It preserves, it holds. Without its dryness, your careful embalming would mean little. As the procession advances, you think about the long tradition you serve. For centuries, bodies have been prepared in this way, methods refined, improved, ritualized. Early burials once relied on natural desert desiccation. Later generations learned to replicate that process intentionally. Salt, resin, wrapping, prayer. A collaboration between observation and belief.
Menka walks on the opposite side of the sledge, unusually solemn. Torchlight flickers across his face, illuminating the resin stains that never quite wash from his hands. He catches your eye briefly and nods. No jokes tonight. Ahead, the tomb entrance comes into view, carved into limestone rising from the desert floor. For elite families, tombs can be elaborate, with painted chambers and carved reliefs depicting harvests, banquets, and daily life. For others, they are simpler, but still carefully prepared. Whatever lies inside this particular tomb, it represents permanence. A house built not for decades, but for eternity. As you approach, the chanting resumes. Low, rhythmic phrases invoking protection from deities associated with the afterlife. Among them is Osiris, ruler of the Duat, whose own death and resurrection form the mythic foundation of Egyptian funerary belief. To be associated with Osiris is to participate in renewal. The deceased is often spoken of as the Osiris name, symbolically united with him. Mainstream historians agree that Osirian theology became central to Egyptian burial customs over time, though the emphasis varied by period and region. Earlier solar beliefs linked the deceased more closely with Ra's nightly journey. By your era, these traditions have blended, sun and underworld intertwined in complex theological harmony. You may not articulate it in scholarly terms, but you feel the synthesis in the rituals themselves. The sledge halts before the tomb entrance. Torches are planted into the sand, forming a ring of wavering light. The coffin is lifted once more, this time from sledge to bier. You help guide it carefully through the narrow doorway. The temperature inside drops noticeably. The air smells of dry stone and faint mineral dust. Within the burial chamber, oil lamps illuminate painted walls. Scenes show the deceased seated at offering tables, fields of tall grain swaying in carved relief, servants bringing goods. These images are not decoration alone. They are sustenance rendered in pigment and lime. Scholars still debate how literally Egyptians believed such scenes functioned, magical provisioning or symbolic reassurance. Standing here, you suspect the distinction would seem unnecessary to those who commissioned them. The coffin is positioned upright briefly as final prayers are spoken. Then it is lowered gently into its resting place, perhaps within a stone sarcophagus, perhaps into a niche prepared for it. The sound of wood settling against stone echoes softly in the chamber. Silence follows. Family members step forward one by one to place small offerings near the coffin. A loaf of bread, a garland, a whispered farewell. Tears glisten in lamplight. You remain near the rear, observing. Your role nears its end. The work of your hands has carried this person from flesh to form, from vulnerability to preservation. What happens now belongs to forces beyond your trade.
Sealing the tomb is a practical necessity. Stone blocks will be maneuvered into place, plaster applied, entrances concealed when possible, protection against animals, against thieves, against time itself. Tomb robbery is not unknown, even in your lifetime. Preservation is both sacred duty and ongoing challenge. As you step back out into the night air, stars scatter across the sky in brilliant density. The desert cools rapidly, releasing the heat stored through the day. The Nile murmurs faintly in the distance. Behind you, inside stone walls, linen-wrapped form rests in stillness, senses symbolically opened, supplies arranged, name spoken.
You brush fine dust from your hands and look once more toward the sealed entrance. There is no dramatic sign, no visible transformation. Eternity begins quietly. And tomorrow, when the sun rises again over fields of barley and papyrus, another body may arrive at the House of Beauty. Another family will stand in grief and hope. Another journey will begin. But tonight, beneath the vast Egyptian sky, you walk back toward the river with the steady knowledge that you have done your part in the long conversation between mortality and memory. End of script. Sweet dreams.